In the past few days, you have seen so many images of the Royal Enfield Himalayan 452 from its rides, and it's on social media, its website, everywhere. But now we can finally tell you all about its specifications too. So right from its engine capacity to features, hardware, design bits, and everything else that you need to know. However, we feel that is not enough, and the right way to put things in perspective is by first comparing the new Himalayan 452 with the older one, that is the Himalayan 411, and then doing the same between the Himalayan 452 and the KTM 390 Adventure. Without further ado, let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Bikewala. You are watching specification comparison video of the Himalayan 452 and the Himalayan 411 and the Himalayan 452 with the KTM 390 Adventure. And before we begin, we'd like to make one thing clear, and that is everything that we are going to tell you from now in this video is solely going to be based on what you've seen on the internet and everything that is available on the spec sheet, because our riding opinion is under embargo till 10th of November. So firstly, let's talk about the new Himalayan 452's engine. Now this is a completely new and probably one of the most modern engines that Royal Enfield has made, and it is called the Sherpa 450. It's basically a 450cc single cylinder liquid cooled engine and makes 40 bhp at 8000 rpm and 40 Newton meters at 5500 rpm. It's also the most modern engine from Royal Enfield so far. Now speaking of its internals, the bore value is 84 mm whereas the stroke is 81.5 mm. If we compare the new engine with the 411s, then there are a lot of changes internally. Firstly, the 411 is an air and oil cooled engine and it gets a 5-speed gearbox instead of the 6-speed gearbox that we see with the 452. Then the older engine only makes 24 bhp and 30 Newton meters. So clearly the new Himalayan is notably more powerful as well. Then the older Himalayan also gets a smaller bore and longer stroke, and overall the new Himalayan's engine is a near perfect square engine, whereas the older one is a long stroke motor. Then we'll move on to the Royal Enfield Himalayan 452's features. And it's clear as the day that Royal Enfield has given the new model a truckload of features, right from all LED illumination to an integrated tail light with the turn signals, TFT screen, smartphone connectivity, navigation with GPS, ride-by-wire, and even a Type-C charging port. And on the contrary, if you compare it with the older Himalayan, the Himalayan 411, it gets fewer features, and that is a halogen headlight with an LED tail light, a triple navigation, a semi-digital instrument cluster, and pretty much that's all that the older Himalayan gets. Then there is the hardware that is different on both the Himalayans. The new model comes with USD front forks and an offset monoshock, whereas the regular one does with regular forks and a regular monoshock. Now the new model gets more suspension travel at both ends, and that's around 200 mm. Even the brakes on the latest Himalayan are bigger. It gets a 320 mm front disc and a 270 mm rear disc with switchable ABS. Well, you can clearly see that the two Himalayan models, the 452 and the 411, differ on a lot of aspects. But what about the new Himalayan's real-world riding performance? Well, that is something we can only tell you on 10th of November and after that. So now we'll move on to the comparison of the Himalayan 452 and the KTM 390 Adventure. Obviously, the KTM 390 Adventure and the Himalayan 452 differ on a lot of aspects. Firstly, the KTM looks a lot more aggressive, has a butch design, and it gets different features, and the overall configuration of the engine, the layout is also different. The 390 Adventure gets a smaller engine but makes more power, and it's a short stroke unit compared to the Himalayan 452. Now, even though the hardwares on both the bike looks similar, the internals could be largely different. And how different is that? Well, that is something we'll find out in the course of this video. The new Sherpa 450 engine on the Himalayan 452 has to be one of its highlights. It is a 450cc single cylinder liquid cooled engine and makes 40 bhp at 8000 rpm and 40 Newton meters at 5500 rpm. Even when you look at its bore and stroke value, it is 84 mm and 81.5 mm, which makes it a near perfect square engine. Yes, it also gets a slip and assist clutch for added convenience. Then there is a 6-speed gearbox, but Royal Enfield hasn't offered a quick shifter on the new Himalayan ADV. On the other hand, the 390 Adventure gets a completely different engine. It is relatively smaller and is 373cc liquid cooled and makes 43 bhp at 9000 rpm and 37 Newton meters at 7000 rpm. Now the 390 Adventure's bore and stroke differ from the Himalayan. It gets 89 mm and 60 mm, which makes it a proper short stroke quick revving engine. While the 390 ADV makes 4 bhp more, it also gets 3 Nm less than the Royal Enfield Himalayan 452. Even though both bikes get a 6-speed gearbox, the setup for two could be completely different. In our experience with the 390 Adventure, its cogs are stacked relatively close and there's a bi-directional quick shifter too. Now we can't tell you what the Himalayan's gearbox feels like, but as we already know, it doesn't get a quick shifter. And just to give you a reference, the 390 Adventure's engine is rev happy and it climbs the revs very quickly. Its mid-range is sufficient for touring, and if you were to take it off-roading, then the low-range revs should be quite adequate. But once we get into the details, we can understand that the 390 ADV is big and roomy motorcycle. The moment you are on the saddle, there is a feeling of opulence and a good commanding view of what is in front of you. It looks very modern and seems to be directly derived from the 1290 Adventure. While the two bikes seem to get similar suspension setup, the Himalayan uses 43 mm USD front forks and an offset monoshock, both with 200 mm of wheel travel. As for its brakes, the new Himalayan uses a 320 mm front disc and a 270 mm rear disc with dual channel ABS, and it's switchable at the rear. But things get a little exciting when you move towards the 390 Adventure range and learn that there are a couple of options to choose from. The base and mid-spec bike get regular USD forks with alloy wheels, whereas the top-spec 390 Adventure has adjustable suspension and spoke wheels, so the rider can tweak the rebound and dampening as per his or her choice. But the same can't be done on the Himalayan 452 as it doesn't get adjustable front forks. As of now, both the KTM 390 Adventure and the Himalayan 452 get spoke wheels with tube tires. But Royal Enfield is working on cross-spoke wheels with tubeless tires, and those are soon to be approved in India as well. As for KTM, you still have to make do with regular tube tires. Then Royal Enfield has given it a massive 17-litre fuel tank and it weighs 196 kg. Then it also gets an impressive ground clearance of 230 mm. While the Himalayan's standard seat height is 825 mm, it can be increased to 845 mm. But for shorter riders, Royal Enfield will sell an accessory seat height which brings the height down to 805 mm. For reference, the 390 Adventure gets a 14.5-litre fuel tank and weighs almost 20 kg less than the Himalayan 452. But its ground clearance is 200 mm, which is 30 mm lower than the Himalayan, and the seat height is 855 mm as standard. However, there is a low seat height version too for the 390 Adventure, and it gets 835 mm of height. Even when we move on to the features, it's very evident that both these bikes come loaded with it. Now, if you look at the Himalayan 452, it gets a TFT, smartphone connectivity, navigation with Google Maps, ride-by-wire, Type-C charging port, and ABS. Now, this is a lot of features that Royal Enfield is probably offering for the first time on any of its motorcycle. And when you compare it with the KTM 390 Adventure, the Austrian ADV gets, again, it also gets a TFT, but the layout is different. It's a square TFT compared to the Himalayan's circular unit. And then the KTM 390 Adventure also gets traction control, quick shifter, smartphone connectivity, but again, the layout, the features are a little different on that front. And then you get ABS modes too. So you can clearly see while these bikes offer a ton of features, the list is comparatively longer on the KTM's end. All things said and done, these are the comparisons that we've drawn solely based on the spec sheets of all the bikes. But before we get done, we'd like to ask you one question. Which bike do you think would make for a better ADV overall? Is it the KTM 390 Adventure, or is it the brand new Royal Enfield Himalayan 452? Now, if you are waiting for a real world experience of the new Himalayan, like we mentioned earlier, stay tuned till 10th of November and all your questions will be answered then. Till then, stay tuned to Bikewale and don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and don't forget to hit the bell notification too.